The Catcher in the Rye is a coming-of-age novel that follows the disenchanted, sharp-tongued teenager Holden Caulfield as he wanders through New York City after being expelled from his prep school. Set over a few days, the story is narrated in Holden's distinctive voice, cynical, observant, and often humorous as he grapples with feelings of alienation, grief, and confusion about adulthood. Disillusioned by the phoniness of the adult world, Holden yearns to protect innocence, especially that of children, while wrestling with his own mental and emotional turmoil. The novel is a raw, introspective journey through the mind of a teenager on the brink of a breakdown, capturing the universal struggle of growing up. About the author, Jerome David Salinger, known as J.D. Salinger, was a reclusive American writer best known for The Catcher in the Rye, his only full-length novel. Born in 1919 in New York City, Salinger served in World War II before launching his literary career with short stories published in magazines like The New Yorker. His writing often explored themes of youth, innocence, and spiritual alienation. Despite the massive success of The Catcher in the Rye upon its release in 1951, Salinger shunned the public eye, eventually retreating from publishing altogether. He remained intensely private until his death in 2010, leaving behind a legacy defined as much by his influential prose as by his enigmatic personal life. The Catcher in the Rye. It all began when a restless teenager named Holden Caulfield decided to tell his story. Not because he thought it was important or heroic, but just because he needed to let it out. He wasn't in school anymore, at least not right now. He'd been kicked out of Pensy Prep, a fancy private school, for failing most of his classes. But getting kicked out wasn't really the main problem. The truth was, Holden had been drifting for a while, feeling like he didn't belong anywhere. Just before the Christmas break, he stood on a hill, watching the school's football game from a distance. He wasn't in the mood to be part of it. Everything about Pensy felt fake to him, the people, the teachers, even the traditions. And Holden couldn't stand anything phony. That word, phony, became his way of describing the grown-up world he had grown to mistrust. Holden's roommate, Stradlater, was handsome and confident, and while Holden tolerated him, he couldn't quite understand him. That night, Stradlater had a date with a girl named Jane Gallagher, someone Holden used to know well. They had spent hours playing checkers and talking when they were younger, and she was one of the few people Holden actually liked. The thought of Stradlater going out with her and possibly treating her like just another girl made Holden anxious. Trying to distract himself, Holden wrote a composition for Stradlater's English assignment, choosing to describe his younger brother, Hallie's baseball glove. Hallie had died of leukemia a few years ago, and Holden had never fully recovered from the loss. Hallie was kind, smart, and different from everyone else Holden knew. The pain of losing him lingered like a wound that never closed. But when Stradlater returned and dismissed the essay, not appreciating the emotional weight behind it, Holden snapped. The tension between them exploded into a fight, and Holden ended up with a bloody nose. That night, feeling bruised in every way, he made a spontaneous decision. He would leave Pensy early and go to New York City. He didn't want to face his parents just yet, so he'd stay in the city until break started. It would give him time to figure things out, maybe. So Holden packed a few things, took some money from a stash he'd hidden, and slipped away into the cold night. On the train ride to New York, he met the mother of one of his classmates. Though he didn't even like the kid, he pretended to say kind things about him just to be polite. Tea was one of the many moments where Holden felt trapped between what he really felt and what he was expected to say. Once he arrived in the city, he checked into an old, run-down hotel. The place was strange, filled with guests doing odd things behind half-closed curtains. The whole scene unsettled him, but he was too lost in his thoughts to care. He called a girl someone had once mentioned to him. He didn't even know her well, and tried to arrange a date, but she turned him down. Lonely and unsure of what he was even looking for, Holden tried calling people, making plans, anything to feel less alone. Later that night, he met a man in the elevator who offered to send a girl up to his room for a good time, and though Holden agreed, he wasn't sure why. When the girl arrived, Holden panicked. He didn't want to do anything. He just wanted to talk, maybe have someone to sit with. But she didn't get it. She was confused and annoyed, and when Holden refused to pay the full amount, she left angry and came back with the elevator man to scare him into giving up more money. They took it, leaving Holden feeling smaller than ever. Lying in bed, Holden talked aloud to Allie, as if his brother could hear him. That was something he often did when things felt too heavy. It was his way of holding on to someone who had once made the world feel safe. The next day, still alone and wandering through the city, Holden searched for something real, something that felt like truth in a world full of phoniness. He thought of calling Jane again, but couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he met 2 tourists in the hotel lounge, danced with them, and even tried to impress them with stories that weren't true. But none of it made him feel any better. He decided to go to Central Park, a place that reminded him of home in simpler times. He thought about the ducks in the lagoon. Where did they go in the winter? Did someone come and take care of them? The question became a kind of symbol for him, a quiet plea for answers in a world that seemed cold and uncaring. Holden wanted comfort. He wanted connection. But every time he reached out, he seemed to fumble it. He called an old girlfriend named Sally and arranged to meet her. Maybe she could help him feel normal again. But that plan would take him down another confusing path, one that only deepened the ache he carried inside. Holden dressed up and met Sally Hayes at the Biltmore Hotel. She looked beautiful, and for a moment he felt like maybe this was what he needed. A familiar face, a pleasant afternoon. They went to see a play, and though the performance was well done, Holden could hardly enjoy it. He kept watching the people around them, feeling annoyed at how fake and dramatic they all seemed. Sally was polite and charming, but Holden could tell she loved being admired. That bothered him. He wanted something deeper, something honest, ... After the play, they went ice skating at Rockefeller Center, though neither of them was any good at it. Sitting down afterward, Holden suddenly blurted out how miserable he was, how he hated the world and wanted to run away. He asked Sally to come with him, to leave everything behind and escape to the countryside, where they could live a simple, quiet life in a cabin. It was a wild, impulsive dream, and he believed in it for a few fleeting moments. But Sally didn't. She looked at him like he was crazy and told him it was impossible. They had responsibilities, things to do. Her practical response made him angry, and he called her a royal pain in the neck that ruined everything. Sally stood up, hurt and offended, and though she eventually let him walk her to a cab, the connection between them was gone. Once again, Holden had reached out for warmth, and once again he came away colder than before. Feeling frustrated and alone, Holden wandered through the city streets. He thought about calling Jane again, but couldn't find the courage. Instead, he went to a bar where he hoped to meet an old friend, Carl Luce, a former classmate from one of his many schools. Carl was older and used to talk about grown-up things, especially about sex, which fascinated and confused Holden. They met, and Carl sat with him for a while, but it didn't go well. Holden, tired and slightly drunk, kept making jokes and asking awkward questions. Carl grew irritated and told him he needed to grow up. Then he left. Holden stayed at the bar longer, drinking more than he should have. When he finally left, the cold air hit him hard. He felt dizzy, tired, and a little sick. He walked all the way to Central Park, still thinking about the ducks in the lagoon. Everything felt hazy and dreamlike. He dropped a record he'd bought for his little sister, Phoebe, and it shattered in his pocket. That nearly broke him. He thought about death. He thought about Allie. The world felt like it was spinning too fast and falling apart. Eventually, he made his way to his parents' apartment. He didn't plan to stay, he just wanted to see Phoebe. She was the only person who really understood him, the one person who wasn't fake. He sneaked in quietly and found her sleeping in her room. Just seeing her there, peaceful and small, made something inside him settle. When she woke up and saw him, she was thrilled until she realized he'd been kicked out again. Holden tried to explain, tried to tell her how school and adults made him feel like he couldn't breathe. But Phoebe was sharp and honest, and she didn't let him off easy. Then he said something that made her stop in her tracks. He told her he didn't really like anything. Not school. Not people. Nothing. She asked him to name one thing he actually liked. After thinking a long time, he said he liked Allie, and he liked talking to her, Phoebe. That was it. He tried to explain his dream to her, the one about being the catcher in the rye. He imagined himself standing in a big field of rye, where children ran and played near the edge of a cliff. His job would be to catch them if they got too close to falling off. That was all he wanted. To protect innocence. To keep kids from getting hurt the way he had been. Phoebe listened, and she saw how lost he was. She wanted to help. She offered him her Christmas money, giving him every bit she had saved. It touched Holden deeply, but it also made him feel worse. He didn't want her to be part of his messy world. He left the apartment before his parents came home and spent the night at the home of an old teacher, Mr. Antolini. The man was kind and intelligent, and for a while it felt like maybe this was a safe place. Mr. Antolini gave him advice, urging him to apply himself, to try and find meaning in books and learning. Holden listened, tired and raw. But then something happened that shook him. In the middle of the night, he woke to find Mr. Antolini sitting beside him, stroking his head in a way that made Holden incredibly uncomfortable. Whether it was innocent or not, Holden didn't wait to find out. He gathered his things and left immediately, confused and shaken. Just when he thought he might have found an adult he could trust, the moment was ruined. Now he was truly alone, with nowhere left to go. The world felt colder than ever. The morning after he left Mr. Antolini's apartment, Holden wandered the streets of New York in a daze. He hadn't really slept, and his thoughts felt tangled and strange. He kept imagining himself disappearing every time he stepped off a curb, like the world wouldn't even notice if he vanished. It scared him how real that feeling was. To fight it off, he kept talking to Allie in his head, begging him not to let him go. He went to Grand Central Station and rested on a bench for a while, exhausted and dirty. He hadn't eaten properly in days, and his body was starting to feel it. But what hurt more was the loneliness. It clung to him like the chill in the air. He didn't want to see anyone, but at the same time, he didn't want to be alone either. Then he remembered something. Phoebe's school. She'd once mentioned they were putting on a play, and he thought maybe he could sneak in and see her for just a moment. No one else, just her. When he got there, he wandered the halls until he found her classroom. She wasn't there yet, so he left a note with the secretary, asking Phoebe to meet him at the museum during lunch. The museum brought back memories. He'd visited it many times as a kid, and he liked how everything inside stayed exactly the same. No matter how much he changed, the glass cases, the stuffed animals, the old Indian exhibits, they never moved. That gave him a strange kind of comfort. But now, even that didn't feel the same. Phoebe arrived, her school bag heavy and her expression tight. She handed Holden a suitcase and told him she was coming with him. She'd packed her clothes. She was serious. She wanted to leave, just like he had said he would, but Holden hadn't meant it like that, not really. He tried to tell her she couldn't come, that it was a terrible idea. He wasn't going anywhere anymore, and even if he was, she had to stay in school. She got mad, really mad, and wouldn't talk to him. She stood there on the sidewalk, silent and furious, while Holden begged her to say something. To make peace, he suggested they go to the zoo. It was nearby, and he thought maybe the walk would help her cool off. Phoebe didn't answer, but she followed him. They walked quietly, the tension between them still heavy, but slowly, step by step, something began to soften. By the time they got to the carousel in the park, Holden could see her face changing. She was still upset, but not as closed off. The carousel was nearly empty. Holden offered to buy her a ticket, and for a moment she hesitated. Then she climbed onto one of the horses and began to ride in slow, steady circles. Holden sat on a bench nearby, watching her. The music played, and the colors of the lights spun like a warm swirl against the gray afternoon sky. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, Holden felt something close to peace. As she reached for the golden ring, stretching her hand with pure childlike joy, Holden didn't worry about her falling. He realized that sometimes you had to let people try, even if they might slip. That's part of life. He couldn't catch everyone. He couldn't stop every fall. It started to rain lightly, but Holden didn't move. He just sat there in his damp coat, watching his little sister spin around and around. And something about it, something about her laughter, her presence, her innocence, made him want to stay, not leave, not run. It didn't solve everything. He was still lost in a lot of ways, still tired, still confused. But in that moment Holden felt a little less broken, a little more willing to try again. After the carousel ride, Holden and Phoebe walked slowly through the park. The rain had settled into a gentle drizzle, and the city seemed quieter than usual, as if it, too, was tired. Phoebe wasn't angry anymore. She slipped her hand into his, and they didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Just being side by side, knowing they had each other, was enough. Holden felt something shift in him. He was still filled with questions he couldn't answer about life, about people, about what was supposed to happen next, but the urge to run away wasn't as strong anymore. For the first time in a while, he thought maybe he could go home. Maybe he could face his parents. Maybe he didn't have to disappear. He didn't tell Phoebe all that. He just walked with her toward the subway, promising he'd see her soon. She looked up at him and smiled, and that simple smile stayed with him long after they said goodbye. The next day passed in a kind of fog. Holden didn't explain where he went or what he did, but it seemed the world had started to quiet down inside his head. The people who had upset him still existed, the phonies, the ones who made him feel small, but their voices weren't as loud now. The chaos of the city had softened a bit, like a storm that had finally passed. He thought a lot about Allie. He always did. Sometimes just picturing Allie's face or hearing his laugh in his mind helped Holden feel grounded. He'd never stopped missing him, but he was beginning to understand that missing someone didn't mean you had to stop living. Allie had loved life, and Holden figured he owed it to him just a little to try again. There were still so many people Holden didn't want to be like. He didn't want to grow into a man who wore a fake smile or talked only about money or success. He didn't want to be part of a world where no one listened and everyone pretended. But maybe, just maybe, he could find a different path, a quieter one, a truer one. One of the things that stuck with him most was something Mr. Antolini had said before things went strange. He'd told Holden that the mark of a truly mature person was someone who could live with not having all the answers, who could be kind and patient, even when life didn't make sense. Holden hadn't understood it then, but now, sitting quietly in the park and thinking about Phoebe's laughter on the carousel, it started to make a little more sense. It didn't fix everything. Holden still didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. He still had no plans, no idea what school or any school meant for him. But he knew one thing for sure. He didn't want to keep running. He didn't want to keep falling. He thought again of that field of rye the one from his dream. He still wanted to be the catcher, to save children from falling off the edge. But maybe that dream wasn't about being a hero. Maybe it was just about being present, watching out for the people he loved, being there when it mattered. As the day came to a close, Holden felt strangely calm. There was no dramatic ending, no big change, just a quiet realization that he was still here, and for now that was enough. Time passed after that rainy afternoon, though Holden didn't say exactly how long. He was somewhere safe now, somewhere quiet, a place where they asked him questions and made him rest. Maybe it was a hospital, maybe it was a kind of school. He never really said, and maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was finally taking a breath. He told his story from there, looking back at everything that had happened over those few days in New York, the wandering, the loneliness, the strange nights and broken moments. And through it all, what came back to him the most wasn't the sadness or the confusion. It was the people. Not all of them, of course. There were plenty he didn't care for, but there were a few who stood out like small lights in the dark. Jane Gallagher, who never moved her kings and checkers and always knew when to be quiet. Allie, with his bright red hair and poems scrawled on a baseball glove. Phoebe, fierce and kind and more grown-up than most adults Holden had ever met. He remembered the way she looked on the carousel, how she laughed without holding back, how she trusted him, even when he didn't trust himself. He didn't know it then, but that moment had saved him. That single image of her spinning around and reaching for the gold ring stuck in his mind more than anything else. He wasn't better yet. Not completely. He knew that. He still felt lost sometimes, still wondered where he belonged. But he had started to talk to people. He'd started to open up, even if it was slow. And though he didn't want to admit it, he missed people too. The funny thing was, after telling the story, he started to miss everyone he talked about, even the ones who had made him angry or confused. That surprised him, and maybe that was the point. Holden didn't know if he'd go back to school. He didn't know what he wanted to do next. But he was starting to think more clearly now, starting to understand that growing up didn't mean giving in to everything fake. It just meant learning to move forward with your eyes open, even if you stumble along the way. And maybe, just maybe, life wasn't something to run from. Maybe it was something to face. As he finished telling his story, Holden gave a quiet warning. Don't ask him what happened after all that. Don't ask if he's going to be okay. Because the truth is, he wasn't sure yet. But he was trying. That was something. He said he missed people. That made him feel strange because during those days, all he wanted was to be away from them. But now, thinking back, he missed them. The conversations, the arguments, the brief flickers of connection. Maybe that was the hardest part. Letting people matter. Letting yourself care, even when it hurts. But Holden was learning. Slowly, painfully, and not all at once. He was learning that you can't always be the catcher. You can't always stop people from falling. Sometimes you just have to be there when they land. And in a quiet, unspoken way, Holden Caulfield was beginning to hope again. Thanks for listening to this gentle retelling of The Catcher in the Rye. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more classic book summaries told in a calm, easy-to-understand way. Until next time, take care and keep reading.